So today, like I said, we're going to be discussing performance evaluations and goal settings for the staff and within your offices. So just to start, we're discussing performance appraisals. And performance appraisals are essentially regularly scheduled reviews of an employee's performance. Those can take place once a year. You can have mid-year reviews and do them every 6 months. Some individuals like to do a 90-day review for new hires just to kind of touch base on how they're learning their job, how they're acclimating, things like that. But you do need to schedule them and just make sure that employees receive their reviews on the same schedule. Some people like to do anniversary-based reviews, so based on their date of hire rather than a calendar year. It's kind of hard to keep up with, especially if you have a lot of employees, but that is an option as well, and some locations do that if they choose to. And these evaluations evaluate an employee's skills, achievements, and growth during the time period when they're being rated. And they're usually tied to an objective rating system. And so later on in the training, we're going to talk about your rating system. We are putting a template, just an example template of a performance review in the chat. So just look out for that if you don't have one in place. At GCFA, we do a combination of goals and competencies. So we're going to be talking about that today, how to set goals for employees, how to set competencies or how to choose competencies for employees as well. So when it comes to having the actual review conversation, it's important to make sure that you're planning the review in advance. So you should have kind of a set procedure, I guess, essentially, of how you go through the process. Do you prefer employees do self-evaluations? Those can be very helpful because it can let you know where the employee feels as though they stand in terms of their performance. And it kind of gives the manager those indicators before they fill out their portion of the performance review so that they can see if there are any gaps. So if you plan to do that, I would write that as part of your procedure. Employees receive self-evaluations. Some people may choose to only have managers do self-evaluations, but I feel like self-evaluations are very beneficial for employees at every level. You may choose to have someone else contribute to the review. I would have that be anyone who is maybe a dotted line supervisor to the employee. Maybe they manage part of their work, or the manager's next level manager, someone who is well aware of the employee's performance throughout the year. I wouldn't have peers give their input unless you're having like several peers and they don't see how the manager or the employees rate themselves, just because you want to keep the information on the review as confidential as possible. And then plan for open dialogue. So just be ready for anything that the employee brings to you. Again, that's where that self-evaluation is going to come in handy, because you're going to know if there are any gaps between how you feel the employee is doing and how the employee feels they're doing. But be sure that you're prepared to talk about the entire goal or plan year, their progress, and then talk about any goals or objectives for the next year. So again, you should have kind of your talking points ready to go when you have the performance appraisal conversation. So whether that be speaking to examples of the employee's performance throughout the year, any statistics or metrics that you've kept on the employee, or any performance-based, essentially, examples. So one of the things that I recommend typically is managers keep a manager's notes tool. I say an Excel spreadsheet is very easy to create. I would encrypt it and put a password on it just in case, because it is confidential employee information. But as a manager, I think it's beneficial to have that information just so you can refer back to it. Whether it be good or bad things about the employee's performance, you can go back and say, oh, on February 5th, I got an email from a customer about what great customer service this employee was providing. And then you can go back and reference that email in your example of why you gave them a higher rating. Or if they have had issues related to meeting project deadlines, you can put the dates when you had conversations with the employee about their issues so that you can refer to specific examples and not just say, overall, you were late on things this year. You want to be as specific as possible and have kind of your research ready to go if you do have to have a difficult conversation with an employee. And make sure that you schedule sufficient time to focus on the review. Make sure you, again, schedule the time with the employee so they know what to expect, but make sure you give yourself about an hour so that the employee can really focus on the conversation during that time. And employees really value the time that they get with their managers to talk about their performance. And so you really want to focus on the employee during that time. And be prepared to discuss the full range of issues. They may not have any negative issues. They may be a stellar employee. And so you want to talk about that. Maybe you want to talk about how they could get training to maybe move them up to the next level. You see them as high potential, and in your mind, if you were to leave your role, this person could easily step into it. How are you going to get them to that point where they would be your successor? So just several things to think about in terms of having this conversation. If an employee has a negative performance rating, or they've had issues through the year, don't be defensive. Be as factual as possible. Stick to your notes in terms of why you're giving them this rating and examples. You want them to get there themselves as to why they received a lower rating. Really have them reflect on their performance related to that specific goal or competency that they're rated low on, so that they can reflect and see how that they feel they can improve on that area, if it is an area in which they need to improve. Make sure you respect the confidentiality of the review. I can't stress this enough. No one really needs to know about the employee's review except for maybe your supervisor or human resources. If you have an HR person there, you may decide that this conversation is going to be very difficult and you want a witness in place. That's perfectly fine, as long as it's someone who is your next level manager or someone in human resources. You definitely don't want the employee's peer being involved in that. And just make sure that you have no cell phone interruptions. You're not checking emails. Right now, if people are working from home, you may have to have performance conversations virtually like this. So make sure you're not checking emails, checking your phone while you're having the conversation. You really want to focus on the employee during this time. And then we typically recommend that you review employees' job descriptions every year or 2 years. 2 years is probably more feasible unless you have a lot of job changes. So if there is a time when you need to update the employee's job description, this is a good time to do that. Or maybe meet with them and say, here's your current job description. I'd like you to reflect on it and see if it still accurately portrays what you do in your role. And if you feel like it needs any changes, we can discuss that. But that can be part of your conversation too, just so you're kind of keeping a consistent practice of updating that information. And then any disagreements would be noted as a matter of record. Typically, you want to give the employee an opportunity to provide comments on the review. So if you give them a rating and it's not what they expected, you're going to want them to put their comments on that review and then let them know that by signing the review, they're indicating that they are aware of it and they have been given a copy, not necessarily that they agree. And sometimes that's part of the signature line. By signing this, you indicate, you've received this information, not that you agree with it. But if you allow the employee to write on the document, or if you have a comment section, type in the comment section, that kind of is an indicator later. If they say they weren't aware of their performance issues, you have this document where you say, well, you wrote on this document that you have issues with your performance, or you're aware of these issues. So it kind of is just a next step. If you do have serious performance review issues, performance related issues, it's another step in your documentation process towards that. If you do have a difficult evaluation that you have to give, you want to make sure that you describe any unsatisfactory performance or behavior in a very objective and clear way. You want to give specific examples. And again, if you have a notes tool, you could just refer back to that over the past year, and you can have things that you can speak to. But any instances where they didn't meet their goals, they didn't meet timelines, and the impact that had on the team or the customer, things like that. So again, you don't want to say, I feel like you always XYZ. You want to say, we had several instances this year where you didn't meet deadlines. You were supposed to, draft this document by March 1st. I didn't receive it until April. Just be as specific and objective as you can in having difficult conversations. And then you want to get the employee to kind of engage in that information and kind of come up with an action plan with you to resolve the performance review issues or any behavioral issues. Maybe it's attendance. Maybe they're always late. And you know, a minute or two is one thing, but if you need like your receptionist to be at her desk at 8:30 so she can take calls or let people in the door in normal times, if you're working from home now, it may be different. Make sure you're addressing those as they come up, and then you can use this also as a time to document any issues that arise. And then you want to have an action plan and establish milestones going forward of dates when you would review their progress. What I like to avoid is specifically saying this will be addressed again in 90 days. If this is like if you're writing someone up or something like that, because if they are late 15 times in the next month, you don't want to have to wait 90 days to evaluate the issues that they have. You want to say that you will follow up with them in a shorter time frame, or just say follow up in the future. But I just don't like to be tied down to a specific time frame. If you have someone who needs to improve immediately, you don't want them to, you know, say, well, I have 90 days and then wait, you know, you have to wait until that time period to address it. So just something to consider there. And performance management is an ongoing and continuing process. It's not just a one-time conversation. It's not just a once a year, I sit down with my manager and they let me know, you know, what my problems are or how great I'm doing. It's an ongoing touch base with that employee, a conversation about how they're doing. If they're doing great, let them know that. I know employees appreciate that, to hear how well they're doing. Or if they get something in ahead of time, if they're ahead of their goals, letting them know that they're really doing a great job on that project. That's really beneficial to employees as well. And then if you need to take corrective action, or you need to change or update goals because of changes throughout the goal year, then use those touch base points to do that and kind of keep the employee aware of where they are in the performance review process. Open communication, I can't stress this enough. Employees should be comfortable coming to you. Maybe there is something standing in the way of them completing a task. Maybe they're relying on another department for information related to their project and they just can't get communication from that department. They should feel comfortable coming to you and saying, I need help with this. I feel like this is a barrier to me completing this task. So from a manager standpoint, that should be like the set rule. There's an open door. And if you have any issues related to your work or you want to come to me for guidance, then feel free to do so. And then you want to just coach and assist employees who come to you, and especially those who are failing to meet standards, just to let them know what you expect. So when it comes to the actual performance review or performance appraisal process, we're going to look at what we call goals and competencies. So a goal would be set by an employee with their manager, in conjunction with their manager. The manager would need to approve their goal, and it would be need to be achieved during an evaluation period. So in this year, in 2021, here is what you're supposed to accomplish. It's tied to their role or their department. So maybe someone in human resources is tasked with implementing a new HRIS system. That would be specific to their role, and that would be something that they could control and they could be in charge of. Competencies are more of these like overarching characteristics or attributes that are exhibited by employees while they're doing their job, but it could pertain to a larger group of employees. So you could apply them to all individuals across multiple departments. You could say all of your employees within your organization have to be rated on a certain competency. And so we're going to go into a little more in depth about what the competencies mean, but this is the performance appraisal example that we put into the chat. And so you would talk about the goals and responsibilities, how the employee did, and then give them ratings. And you can see on the right side, this is a 1 to 4 rating scale. We're going to talk about rating scales a little later on, but you can see that those are defined. So they know that 4 would be exceptional. They are consistently superior and significantly exceed position requirements. And they clearly define what a 1 would mean, what a 2 would mean, etc. And then at the bottom, please sign below to acknowledge the employee has received the document. Again, not necessarily agreeing, but they received the document and they are aware of their score. You're also going to want to give them a copy once you have signed the document as well, just so they have a copy for their records they can take with them and refer back to if they need to.
And Tricia, really quickly, I put that document in as a handout. It would not let me load it as a Word document. So I'm going to put my email at the bottom because we have some members that don't already have my email. If you want that in a Word document so you can edit however you want to, feel free to just send me an email and I'll send you the Word document of that.
Thank you. So when it comes to setting goals for employees for the review period, you're going to want to kind of go through a broader process. So you will want to review the organization as a whole. What have you set as the mission for the organization or as your department? What do you hope to accomplish within that review period? Are there larger goals that you've been tasked with as a leader that you could kind of trickle down to the employees below you and then use those to set the goals for the employee that year? Make sure that the goals are meaningful and they're not just additional tasks or things the employee can do. It's either helping them accomplish the goals of the department, helping them accomplish their individual goals, helping them really grow into their role, or helping them grow into a higher level role. So just keep that in mind as well. And then make sure that they are SMART goals. SMART goals, I'm sure most of you have heard of this. They are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So specific, you're going to speak to what exactly it is that they want to achieve, how they want to achieve it, when, and then think about why does the person want to reach this goal? Is this something that they can do, and how would it benefit them in their current role or benefit the department overall? Is it measurable? So what will occur when you reach your goal? How will you know the goal is complete? This will also help you in setting milestones or little like touch base points throughout the year if there are specific things that they need to complete at different times to reach the overall completion of the goal. But just think about, how will I measure that the actual goal is complete? Is it attainable? Is this reasonable within this set time frame? And also, do they have the ability in their position to actually achieve this goal? They may, if they need to lead a team, are they in a position where they can have that responsibility and have that control over that team to get the things done that they need to? Or is this beyond their reach and they would have to go through several individuals, which could potentially be a barrier to them completing it? So are they actually capable of attaining this goal and completing it in their role within the company? Is it relevant? Does it pertain to the goals of the conference? Does it pertain to the goals of the organization? Is it related to their actual position? You wouldn't want me in HR over an IT project, because first of all, I don't know enough about IT to do that, but also I don't have the control to let those employees know what needs to happen and to get that up and running. So is it related to the position or the department goals as you see them? And is it time bound? When should it be completed? Is the timeline reasonable? Is it feasible? Can they do it in the amount of time that you give them? And again, are there smaller deadlines that you can set to make sure that they are on point to get this completed within the time frame? So in terms of the goals for the employees, you want to define and establish those at the beginning of the year. You want to clearly communicate to the employee what their goals are, and then how the timelines would relate to completing the goals. And you want to agree on that timeline with the employee. Everyone within the goal knows that it has to be completed by September 30th, maybe because that's the end of the quarter and you need this, to be ready to go for quarter 4, something like that. And then if there are any changes or redirection of goals, you can communicate those in a timely manner. So maybe your budget's changed. I know a lot of budgets changed last year because of COVID. So maybe you did have an idea that you were going to implement a new system, but that just wasn't feasible for your organization. You need to make sure you're clearly communicating that to employees in a timely manner so that they are aware. And Caitlin, I don't know if did we get the SMART goal setting document as a handout?
That worksheet is at the very top of the chat. So yes, you should have that.
So we're also providing a document that's just giving you an example of a goal and how it can be a SMART goal. And then you would set your own goal and then use the worksheet to say, this is how I make it specific. This is how I make it measurable. It's just, you don't have to use it, obviously, but it's something that's useful, especially when you're clarifying to the employee how you can make those goals more specific. So these are just some examples. If we were all in person, we would get in teams and we would talk about how these goals could be more smart. But when it comes to setting goals, you don't want to be vague. Decrease department budget, participate in development opportunities. Maybe you want to say, participate in 3 trainings over the year that relate to tax issues related to payroll. That's pretty specific. If you give them a time to complete them, if they have the ability to sign up for those, if you have the budget to pay for it, or maybe you have free trainings that they can attend, just as long as it's within the employee's control and it's tied to their job, you want to make sure they're clear on what they are responsible for. And then, so the second piece of this, we talked about goals and setting those related to the employee's position. But when it comes to competencies, now again, these could be for all employees within your organization. You could say, you're going to be rated this year on your job knowledge. And here's how we define that. Do you possess the skills and knowledge to perform the job competently? Do you understand the expectations of the job and ensure that you have functional and professional skills that are continually utilized? You want to define the competency and again, let the employee know that you are going to be rating them on this competency at the end of the year. Accountability. Do you hold yourself accountable for assigned responsibilities? Do you see the task through to completion in a timely manner? And then again, you're going to be rating them on this at the end of the year. Maybe again, all of your employees may be rated on accountability, but maybe all of your managers could be rated on delegation. That would not make sense for your receptionist to delegate her tasks because she doesn't have that scope of control within her role. But for managers, maybe you want to say, we're going to give a third competency to managers and they're going to be rated on delegation. How do they delegate their responsibility? Do they delegate it appropriately? And do they delegate their task based on the employee's ability and potential? What you want to think about, and we're going to talk about ratings, but what you want to think about is, for you and for that employee in that role, how could they get a 4, an above and beyond that they've shown superior delegation? What would that look like for you throughout the year? So that when you're making your notes throughout the year, you can kind of gauge how they're going above and beyond or how they're not performing related to that specific competency. And that will help you when you get to the end of the year and you think, okay, how do I rate them on delegation? I don't remember them delegating. I wasn't, taking notes, or I wasn't, keeping up with anything. That will help you at the end of the year if you have those specific examples. Or maybe you let the employee know, hey, you're going to be rated on delegation this year. So I want you to really focus on that. And I want you to kind of loop me in on anything that you feel like I should know about, just so I can kind of keep track of that throughout the year.
Tricia, do you mind if I jump in really quickly? So one of the things I just wanted to share, so for example, at GCFA, one of the things we do at the very beginning of the year is we will look at, and I can actually send out, we have a list of like 500 competencies that we review. We will pick maybe 2 or 3 competencies for every employee of GCFA to work on and work throughout the entire year. So it may be something like customer service or collaboration. And then as Tricia mentioned, there may be a competency that we focus on for the executive team or the managers. And then we actually have our employees look at the list with their manager at the very beginning of the year and say, okay, what are some things that we want to work on for ourselves personally? So I would pick something with Moses to work on for myself. So it's a total of about 5 or 6 competencies, but 2 of those are organizational wide, and then 1 maybe just for managers, 1 maybe for employees. So I just wanted to kind of share how we go through that process, but I've made a note to send out the competency list as part of our handouts for this.
And that list will come in very useful because, again, you want to clearly define what that would look like and how the employee will be rated. So when it comes to rating the employee, sometimes people want to have a 1 through 5 scale where, 1 is unsatisfactory, 2 is needs improvement, 3 is meets. And so you can kind of, rate the employee based on that. What we're going to talk about today is a 4-point scale, but it's really up to you. As long as you're using the same scale and it's clearly defined, you can use whatever you need to do. So let's say you have an individual who is your lowest rating is needs improvement. Maybe they meet some expectations of the position. They perform some aspects of the job. They may have unsatisfactory performance and need a performance improvement plan to concentrate on the areas of weakness, or they could require additional resources or training to adjust their rating. So again, when you set these goals for employees or you set these competencies, you want to think about how they could receive that rating, what you're going to look for throughout the year to determine what their rating should be. So let's say that's the lowest. Your next lowest rating would be met expectations. Now, I want to stress, met expectations means you did exactly what you were supposed to do. No more, no less. You were supposed to implement a system by September 30th, and you did that. On September 30th, the system was ready to go. A lot of times employees think that I did what I was supposed to do, so I should get a 4 or I should get a 5, whereas they actually just met the expectation. They didn't go above and beyond. I want you to be comfortable with giving a met expectations to employees, because what you don't want to do is inflate the ratings in any way. If they didn't go above and beyond, if they didn't get it done early, they didn't get it done under budget. If you can't speak to why they went above and beyond, I wouldn't give them a higher rating just for the sake of doing so. And a lot of people have to adjust to that mindset, but you just want your ratings to be as accurate as possible. And so if they did completely perform the job in the time that they were supposed to, and it was done on time and that was it, a met expectations is perfectly fine. It's perfectly okay to just say you met the expectation. If they exceeded the expectation, then that's okay too, if you can speak to how they exceeded your expectations in completing that. If they met them in that expectation in a way that exceeded the plan, maybe they got it done early. Again, maybe they came in under budget. Maybe they realized throughout the project that there was an additional cost savings to the organization if you went a different way, and so they can speak to how they saved the organization money. Just some examples of how you could speak to they went above and beyond. What you don't want to do is have 2 employees who have the same goals because they're both accountants, for example. They both did the exact same thing. They both met the goal and they did what they were supposed to, but one gets a 4 and one gets a 3. You want to be able to speak to why you're giving one employee a higher rating or why you're giving an employee a higher rating, and be able to articulate the specific examples of why you feel like they deserved the rating that they received. And then again, exceptional. So this is again a 1 to 4 rating scale. So they far surpassed the objectives that you gave them. They continuously contribute to the organization's success. They add significant value. They have a comprehensive understanding of their work. Again, you want to articulate what they did throughout the rating period that warrants this rating. And maybe they did get an exceptional. Maybe they got an exceptional from you, but they gave themselves a met expectations because some employees have just higher standards for themselves. And you want to say to that employee, here are the reasons why I gave you an exceptional. Here's what you did that was above and beyond what you were supposed to do during the goal year. So again, that's where those notes throughout the year and your documentation is really going to come into play and be beneficial. So again, if we were in person, we would use this as an exercise time to get in groups, but this is just an example of something to consider. So if Tim was expected to plan and oversee all aspects of the office's relocation to a new building, so all systems are up and running by September 1st, 2021, how would he get a met expectation if he did exactly that? How would he exceed expectations? Did he get it completed early? Did he realize an issue with the new building and was able to remedy that before you were able to move in to prevent any like long-term cost issues? Something like that. So again, when you set the goal with the employee, you want to think about the future and think about how that they could get those higher ratings. So those are things that you could look for. Or maybe they completely came out of left field and they provided something or they found something you never thought about, and you can speak to that activity or what they found in terms of how they got that higher rating. One thing I do want to say, nothing should be a surprise to the employee during the performance review. We talked about open communication. We talked about touch points earlier on. But what you don't want is to get to the end of the year and say you gave the employee a 1 because they didn't do what they were supposed to, and they had no idea that that was coming. It's one thing for them to know they didn't meet deadlines and say they still deserve a 3, and they, have that argument. But if they do have performance issues, they should have been aware of those before the actual conversation. They should know this is coming because of your ongoing communication with that employee.
Tricia, do you mind if I jump in one more time?
Please.
So, and that kind of ties into one of the questions that we got, which was a recommendation on how to introduce this into an organization in a non-threatening way. And one thing I would say is the way that we've done it at GCFA is at the very beginning of the year, January, February, we will do a training with managers and a training with employees. The managers will be kind of system related, but also SMART goals. How do we develop goals? And if you have that goal setting process with employees, they feel like they're a part of it. They're able to lend voice to their goals as well. And they may want to set some own developmental goals for themselves. And then we do the performance review at the end of the year around October, November. But there should be, as Tricia said, conversations happening along the way. Nobody should ever go into a performance review not knowing if it's going to be a good or a bad conversation. It should be conversations along the way. And so it is kind of coaching managers and guiding managers to make sure they're having those conversations throughout the year. But hopefully, if we get everybody on board and get a good training in place up front, it lets employees know this is really just about feedback and supporting the employees and giving them that opportunity where if they are having places where they want to grow or develop, this can help that process as well. So it can be a really useful tool if it's done correctly.
Yes. And anytime you have a conversation with an employee, if they have, whether it be throughout the year or the performance appraisal process, you should expect to discuss the expectations that you have, where the employee is deficient, and how they can improve. And one thing I will say is your best friend throughout this whole process is documentation. So what I like to do, if you're having just a verbal coaching conversation with them, you need to document it in some way. So maybe that's a follow-up email. Hi, Tom, as we discussed, you haven't been meeting your deadlines. We really need you to get that completed. Here's the, what we discussed in terms of deficiency and what the expectation is. Then you file that email away and you have the date when you discussed it with them. You have all the information you need. So if it gets better, that's great. And if it doesn't, you need to refer back to that. You can do that for your next step. So, and again, this is another exercise. If we were in person, we would complete. But as a leader, if you are in a leadership position and you have direct reports and you, maybe have an employee who hasn't been performing, just take the time to kind of reflect on when an employee was deficient and how you could have addressed that, what you would have said to them, and kind of get in that mindset of, okay, the next time this comes up, or if it was recently, I'm going to discuss it with them. And here's what I would say. Whether it's related to their attendance or their performance or their conduct. Just what you don't want to do is the employee continues to exhibit this behavior that's unacceptable. And then all of a sudden they've been doing this for a year and now you start addressing it because anything could have happened in that year. Maybe they filed a complaint. Maybe they developed a disability. Maybe they got pregnant. And so now if you address it after it's been going on for a long time, they're going to think, well, why are you talking about this now? I've been doing this for a year. You never mentioned it to me. Is it because I recently became pregnant or something of that nature? So that's just where, again, that documentation and that clear communication is really going to benefit you as a leader and kind of keep you, compliant and your employees knowing what the expectations are. So I just wanted to go through some things to consider when you're rating employees on that 1 to 4 or 1 to 5 scale. As human beings, we tend to display certain behaviors. And so these are some of the rating perils that you could see or you could fall prey to. And so you want to be aware of those just so you can kind of consider those as you're rating your employees on their evaluations. So you have what's called the halo or horn effect. And that means that maybe they were given 3 goals throughout the year. And on one of them, they really knocked it out of the park. They got 5. It's exceptional. You know exactly why. why they got that rating, and they really did a great job. But on the other two goals, they did exactly what they were supposed to. They met expectations. Well, this effect is when you let that one really great thing or one really terrible thing sway your ratings on the other two goals. You really need to look at those goals independently, or those competencies independently, and think about how they performed in those individual areas, rather than letting one really great thing or one really bad thing sway you and have you rate them higher or lower than you would on those other items. Central tendency, you want to give everybody a 3, because a 3 is easy. You don't have to explain where they were deficient, or you don't want to have to come up with examples of how they were great. Everybody gets a 3, and then, that's it. Leniency, so you give higher ratings to avoid conflict. So maybe someone really was not performing well this year, but you want to give them a 3 because you don't want to deal with it. You don't want to give them an honest rating because you don't want to have this difficult conversation with the employee. So you're more lenient in your rating, and you give them higher rating than they deserve. Just be aware of that. You don't want to do that because, again, if there are ongoing performance issues, you want to address those as they come up, and you want to make sure you're not letting things go for years or months and not addressing them. Because, again, something could come up in that time. And then all of a sudden you're addressing it and they're wondering why it's an issue now. Recency, you only focus on recent events. So maybe the entire rating period is the year, but you think, well, they really were accountable when we had that issue in October. You're not looking at the entire rating period. So again, that's where the manager notes tool and documenting your conversations is really going to come into play. The similarity or like me bias. So that is when we tend to give a more favorable rating to employees who have similar values or interests to you. So maybe you love your dog as much as I do, and you have pictures of your dog in your office, and then one of your employees has a dog too, and you talk about your dogs together because that's your common bond. So you may tend to rate that employee higher because you have all these positive thoughts of all these times you've talked about your dog with that employee. Just keep in mind, again, be as objective as possible and look at the individual goals and competencies and employees when you're rating them. And then constancy, you rate employees based on rank order. So Tom really did a great job. He gets a 4 based on his goals this year, but Susan didn't do a great job, and she went above and beyond, but she didn't do as great as Tom, so I obviously can't give her a 4. You don't want to rate them based on what other employees received. You want to look at the individual goals, the individual accomplishments throughout the year, and then make your ratings based on those items for each individual employee. Again, make objective statements. Don't say, I feel like you always do X, Y, Z. You want to be able to speak to specific instances. Make sure you're keeping records throughout the year. I can't stress that enough. I know I've said it 17 times, but that is just really essential when you're looking at employee performance. Discuss specific issues as they come up. Again, think about the legal impact of giving someone a higher performance review. Maybe they don't deserve a 3 or a 4, but you've been doing it because it's easier. And so now they're still performing the same way, and you start addressing their issues, and they wonder, why are you giving me these low ratings all of a sudden? I'm doing the exact same thing I've always been doing. So just consider that. And make sure you avoid specific comments related to protected class, age, race, sex, national origin, specific disabilities. And I know that seems pretty straightforward, and you think no one would do that. Why would you reference that? But maybe someone writes, Tom did a great job this year and completed this goal timely, even though he was on FMLA for 3 months. That's not something you should put in a performance review. So again, just be cognizant of those things as you're making the ratings, make them comments, and make them as objective as possible, and leave out anything that could be a protected class. That is all that I have. Caitlin, do we have questions?
Yeah, let me go through. Just as a reminder, we do have the 2 handouts, and we do have some questions. Do we have a template for a 90-day review of a new hire? We don't specifically, I don't believe, Tricia. One thing, huh?
I don't think we do.
Yeah. But I will say, just as a side note here, the 90-day review, a lot of people do that, or a 6-month review. The only thing I'm going to say here is if you have that process in place, you need to make sure that you do it, because that's one of the ones we see people forget a lot. So we help a lot of people with writing policies. If you have that in your policy, you need to make sure you do it. If for some reason you have it in there and you realize that you're not doing it, you need to take it out of your policy. So whatever you do, just be consistent and make sure you're doing it. Who should be part of the Treasurer, Director of Administrative Services evaluation? So for those of you that were on the call yesterday, we had a big conversation about the Personnel Committee. Of course, there's CFNA as well. So some of our positions within the annual conference will actually report to a committee as opposed to someone within the organization. Here, I would say it depends, because every annual conference is a little bit different. In some annual conferences, the treasurer directly reports to CFNA. I mean, I know what the book of discipline says, but they report directly to the CFNA, but the bishop is also heavily involved. I think it just depends on how your organization your annual conference is structured. It might be a combination of CFNA with the bishop weighing in. And a perfect example of, working with Moses and our board, Moses reports directly to the board, but of course we work with him on a daily basis. So sometimes we do a 360 where we get peer review evaluation, we get manager review. So it just kind of depends. I think that would be a good situation where you would get input from the bishop and maybe from peers and do kind of more of a 360. But if you have specific questions about that kind of are more in the weeds, we can talk about that offline if you want to. And Tricia, do you want to, I talked a little bit about how to introduce this in a non-threatening way. Do you want to speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah, I think that the best thing that you could do to implement this process is to be as clear in your communication as you can, to let employees know this is so everyone can, be aware of their performance, so that we have more clear communication between leadership and employees. We want to be as transparent as possible. And so I would set a date and say, starting on this date, here's what we're going to do. The more you can train employees on what to expect, then the more that they will be prepared for what is coming. I actually traveled to an annual conference a few years ago and did a training with managers and with staff and just said, this is what the leadership has decided. And I came in as an objective third party and talked about the process. And so the more you can communicate with employees and let them know what's coming and why you're changing, and then it's happening for everyone at every level, the more well received it will be.
And I got a question about competencies on the template that we sent in. Is it for everyone in the organization or specific to a department? I try to put several different things in there just as examples, so it's neither nor. But I'm going to send out, like I said, I have a list of competencies, quite a few that I can send just to go through, but it can be whatever it needs to be. I mean, it just depends on what you think the organization needs to work on as a whole, managers or employees. Having a rationale for giving seemingly identical employees different ratings to ensure consistency and fairness in the evaluation process, and not because we reveal employees' evaluations to everyone, right? Correct. Yes, those are completely confidential, but yes, as you mentioned here, people talk to each other and they can. And it's also very important because sometimes people tie performance evaluations to compensation, which if you do that, you want to be very clear. If you give somebody a 3 or a 4, you can articulate why they got a 3 or a 4. And especially if you're paying people differently based on those scores, you want to be really certain that you have reasons of why you're giving them the scores you're giving them. Okay. Is there a template for the manager notes tool? It would be great if there's a phone app. I haven't seen, this is my tool. This is my notebook. But yeah, some people, I'm sure there's something out there, but we have an HRIS system that we use as well that has places for that. But Tricia, are you aware of anything?
No, I have one that I use, and so we can send out a potential template to anyone. If you want to email us, we can send you that copy. It's very simple though. It's just date, what the related conversation was related to, whether that's attendance, performance, conduct, and then notes where you can put in the details, and you have one tab for each employee. So again, it's pretty simple, but I would password protect it and keep it. Or if you have, you can always jot down notes like Caitlin does. Just make sure they're secure.
And I date all my notes. Every page has a new date on it. Should all managers be using the same evaluation metric for staff? And should conference personnel be part of developing that metric? I think the personnel committee, it probably wouldn't be a bad idea for them to review it, especially if you don't have an HR person on staff. I think if you have an HR person, rely on them to develop that. We use the goal / competency model. And so everybody's goals should be specific to them, but the template, the setup should be the same. Now, I will say for our executive team, we get a 360 evaluation. The rest of the staff does not. So our peers are reviewing us. Our direct reports are reviewing us. So it's a little bit different in that manner. But I would say it needs to be, the process and template should be consistent, but the goals will be different and tailored to the person. Would you agree, Tricia?
Yeah, I think the same rating scale, 1 through 5, 1 through 4 would be for everyone. And managers should be trained so that they are consistent in how they rate employees. Yes.
So Emily and hello. So struggling to find the purpose for Committee on Episcopacy members to be on this session. So it is my understanding that there are some people that are interested in doing evaluations for bishops. And so this is to just kind of give that guidance of if you wanted to implement that, how would you begin that process of implementing performance evaluations for bishops? And as I mentioned, we do that. It's a little bit different because Moses reports to the board, but we do that evaluation process for Moses every year. And I work very closely with our committee, our executive committee on the board. As the HR person, I help set that up, but they are the ones actually doing the evaluation. So if you have specific questions of how that works with your bishop, you can reach out to me or Dana Jokey. But this is just kind of to get the thought process started, because each annual conference is very specific in terms of how they're going to do that, how that's going to work. But this is to kind of get, here are the best practices for doing a performance evaluation, is my understanding.
Caitlin, this is Dana. Can I add to that?
Oh yeah, sorry, I didn't see you there. Yeah, absolutely.
So the Book of Discipline does charge the Jurisdictional Committee on Episcopacy with doing the bishop's evaluations, which is why this session is helpful for if you are on the Jurisdictional Committee on Episcopacy. It gives you the tools that you would need to work with those evaluations at that level.
Yeah, and Dana and I, like I said, because it's going to be more tailored and more specific, but Dana and I can work with you on getting additional materials as needed. So if you need to reach out to us following this, we can work with you on a kind of more of an individual specific basis. Okay, I think those are all the questions that we have. So thank you all for joining us today. I think for those of y'all on the personnel track, Tricia, we have one more with you this afternoon.
2, yes.
Yes, so.
Central.
Yes, so we hope to see you all to hear more about our Fair Labor Standard Act, which will be very exciting. All right, thank you.
Thank you.